Hey everybody, Drew Dinkmeyer of DailyRoto.com here with a lineup review. This is the space that each and every week of the NFL season I will look over a few of my lineups, give you an idea of the thought process behind the lineup construction, whether it's for cash games or for GPPs, and hopefully give you some context to help yourself improve as a DFS player. Week 1 was a big one for me as I took down the $150 entry blitz on Fanduel, $100,000 to first place. Let's look at the lineup. All right, so this lineup starts with an Eagles double stack, and this is one of the things our GPP strategy guide, a comprehensive written tutorial on how to attack GPPs, provided by Colin Drew over at DailyRoto.com for our premium subscribers, talks about is looking at ways to double stack, because oftentimes in GPPs, double stacks are actually underowned. People will very frequently stack their quarterback with one pass catcher, but not often two. In this instance, I found Carson Wentz, who threw 3 passing touchdowns for Philadelphia, had him double stacked with 2 options, one that worked out really well, one that was a little bit disappointing, and it was ultimately a lineup that generated a lot of upside. So let's look at this lineup. Carson Wentz, 6% owned. He was our 3rd top rated value at the quarterback position. Huge high team total at home, big favorite. That's usually a situation where quarterbacks historically are very productive. And with Carson Wentz, it is a little bit of a spread out passing game, but there are a bunch of touchdown scorers in that offense with Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, and Zach Ertz. The 2 that I picked in this instance were Deshaun Jackson and Zach Ertz. Deshaun Jackson, always a big play threat to hit that home run. A little bit of a revenge narrative in his favor, going back to Philadelphia, facing one of his former teams in Washington, but more so than anything, just a higher volatility player with a big range of outcomes and a huge upside for just $5,600, expected relatively low ownership there, so chose him to pair with Wentz. The next decision was Ertz or Alshon Jeffrey. In this case, I went Ertz, thinking a lot of the tight end ownership would condense around George Kittle and Travis Kelce. Ertz would be a way to differentiate a little bit, still maintain that high upside, increase that correlation in this lineup. It didn't work out. Ertz didn't have the big day. It was Alshon Jeffrey who scored the 2 touchdowns, one that was counted as a rushing touchdown that I thought might have been a pass, but that double stack would have been even better in this case. And that's the case when you're stacking with a quarterback who has limited rushing capability like Carson Wentz. You're hoping that they're going to throw 3 or 4 touchdowns. You want to accumulate as many of those touchdowns as you can in your lineup. I only got 2 of the 3 in the lineup here. If I had chosen Alshon Jeffrey, I would have had 4 total touchdowns and all 3 of Carson's. But 2 of the 3 was enough to get it done in this lineup where the contest was a little bit smaller field, under 3,000 entries in total. How I rounded out that lineup? For me, it's always going to be running back values. I'm not as concerned about ownership at the running back position. So Dalvin Cook and Austin Eckler were 2 of our highest rated values, 2 of our top 4 values overall on the slate on FanDuel. The other 2, Nick Chubb and Chris Carson. Nick Chubb was the big disappointment. Managed to avoid him in this lineup. Had a lot of exposure to Nick Chubb, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. Then I had Chris Godwin, a pretty chalky play, but a wide receiver that we viewed as pretty high upside in a game that we expected a lot of passing attempts. A low-owned wide receiver in Sammy Watkins. This was a situation where if this lineup, knowing it's using Zach Ertz, means that it's not going to have Travis Kelce. And so for this lineup to really ascend in GPPs, I need Travis Kelce not to do well. And there's 2 ways that can happen. Either Travis Kelce himself cannot do well, or the Chiefs offense as a whole cannot do well. I do not think the Chiefs offense doing poorly was on the table. So I wanted to make sure I had another KC player representing that offense, giving me that upside. In this case, it was Sammy Watkins at 5% owned. He was really the slate breaker and the tournament winner in DFS for week 1. I happened to be fortunate enough to find him in this lineup. The flex spot was filled out by David Johnson. This case, David Johnson was like our 5th or 6th value at the running back position, so not an elite value kind of jumping off the page, but did kind of fit the salary construction of this lineup. You can see it's a little bit cheaper on the whole at the running back spot and wide receiver, so I needed a little bit of a higher end running back to fill it out. David Johnson happened to come with low ownership, really put on a big second half that ultimately pushed this lineup up the leaderboard, and finished out with Seahawks defense, big home favorite, double-digit favorite at home against Cincinnati, a team that we expected to struggle to move the ball. Seattle actually struggled defensively, but was able to generate enough turnovers, enough sacks to deliver a really good score of 12 FanDuel points here. It was enough to ultimately get to the top of the leaderboard, and enough to ultimately push me over the top for $100,000. Now, I do want to mention that on the whole, for me, this was a week that without this lineup, I would not have had a profitable week. I was on pace to lose $15,000 to $25,000 of my investment on a given weekend. I had a lot of Nick Chubb. I had a lot of the Tampa Bay passing game, a lot of George Kittle in the San Fran passing game. So I clearly did not get everything right on the given week. This week was just one of those weeks where I happened to run into a lot of good fortune while finding this lineup. As one of the few lineups I had that everything kind of came together. So, obviously highlight the success, and that's what people always look for. But in realistic terms, this week was not heading to be a good one for me. I got really bailed out by this one lineup that happened to find its way to the top. I think the lineup construction and the thought process, using a lot of double stacks and GPPs, pounding running back values, and then looking to differentiate at wide receiver is a strategy that makes a lot of sense. For me, those types of lineups this week ultimately ended up in a lot of Nick Chubb, which meant a lot of lineups that had nowhere near the cash line. But this lineup happened to have all the pieces that worked with Austin Eckler, Dalvin Cook, and David Johnson, all paying off, and then the high upside range of outcome volatile receivers like Sammy Watkins and Deshaun Jackson. I think going forward, that's still a good strategy to implement in GPPs, and hopefully with that type of strategy, you can find yourself putting together these types of lineups that find their way to the top as well. That's it for me this week. I will be back next week with another look at a lineup review, examining my process and my play. Maybe we'll take a look at some cash game lineups. Maybe we'll take a look at some GPP lineups. It will depend on the week and the results in terms of what we're showing. This week, when you happen to get to the top of a GPP, they want you to show that one. So that's what we did this week. Next week, we'll probably look at some cash game lineups. Until then, best of luck in all your games.